Hi, Shaylee. Hi, Amanda. Welcome. You guys are the first two. You ladies are the first two. I hope I'm saying your name right, Shaylee.
It's Chalet.
Chalet. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Hey,
Natalie, I'm driving, but I want to ask a quick question.
yeah, please.
This is the first one I've tuned in, and I know that this is a multi-series event, so you'll probably address that. But is there a way to enjoy it even when I wasn't live in the past?
Oh yeah, it's all on. I think Marley, you had it up in the Mothers of Influence for a limited amount of time, and I don't know if it's still up. Is it still up?
Yeah, the recordings are all there, Amanda. But I think maybe Amanda's question is, can I jump in today? Is that what you're asking, Amanda? And still be okay?
Both, right? It's kind of both because it is awkward to jump into a part 3. And so really the goal is to get them all in as a whole, but it doesn't make sense for me to be here today. And
I think it's valuable. I mean, I think it's valuable to get, really it's kind of this is the first time I've tried to get, I was telling Marley, like 30 years worth of just learning distilled down into something I can communicate. So frankly, like it feels to me personally, it feels like a big stream of consciousness that's being chunked up into different classes.
Okay.
I think you can get something out of each class, whether you've listened to the others or not, but I do hope that there has been some context set from other classes that I can kind of refer to that will connect bigger ideas quicker because you've heard this big idea. But I don't think that you'll get like nothing from this class because you haven't listened to the other two. I think there's still enough new ideas that maybe haven't been part of your experience that have been part of mine because I went to art school or whatever. I don't know what your background is, but I think there'll be enough newness there that it will spark new ideas for you, I hope. Cross my fingers. You can let me know at the end of class. You'll be my my litmus test. Did you feel lost because you came in the middle, or did you feel like you could follow what I meant?
I'm willing to be a guinea pig. I'm on my way to a friend's house, and I was hoping to gather them around the phone because they are fellow mothers of influence, just a lot less engaged in the community. And so I was like, if I just show up to pick up my kids and I'm like, look, I'm in this awesome thing, join me.
Oh, fun. Well, hopefully they'll enjoy it.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. Thank you.
I think we should go ahead and jump in and get started. So welcome to everybody. We're glad that you're here, and there will be people who are going to keep trickling in, and there are people who are going to be on a recording later on. So we just want to welcome all of you. Like it was mentioned, this is part 3 in Natalie's Nurturing Creativity series. It's 3 of 4, right, Natalie?
Yes. 3 of 4, yes. And I'm actually, I don't want to be 100% set on that 4 number. I think I'll be kind of done explaining, but if you have more questions afterwards, or if you want to continue the conversation, I'd be happy to do it. But I think we'll be pretty well wrapped up for trying to condense what I've learned and communicate it, which is easier said than done.
Which is the beauty of what we do. We might just keep going as long as we feel like we keep going. That's what creation looks like, and that's a precedence here in the community. We definitely can do that. Just a reminder, if you can come off camera, Natalie has said that there's going to be kind of an interactive part, and it's always nice to see who we're talking to, but we recognize your life may not always let you do that, and there's no shame either way. There's also the chat box, so utilize that chat box, and if you have questions, throw them in there, and then when Natalie is ready to open things up, she'll turn it over to us and kind of let us know how she wants that to go.
And I'll be sharing screen, Marley, so if you see stuff in the chat, will you let me know? Because I don't think I will notice that as I'm going through.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful.
So I'm going to turn it to you, Natalie.
Okay, well, let's get started. I'll just jump right in by starting to share my screen here. And just put this in presenter mode so that I can see what's going on. I'm going to move, when this records, does it record where I like seeing your faces when I can? And so I have them over to the right. Marley, when this records, does it record everybody on the right and their names and everything, or does it just see my screen?
I think I have it set to your screen, but then to the speaker. So if someone asks a question, it bumps over to them and then it'll bump to you.
Okay. Oh, now it just went to the top. Oh, now I'm sorry. Just kind of, there we go. That'll be nice. I'll do it that way. Okay. Whoops. How did I get all the way up to this slide? Hold on a second. I thought I was at the beginning. Restart. Okay. So just to very quickly recap, especially for Amanda, since she hasn't seen the other ones yet, but for anybody else who hasn't seen the other ones yet, I would call the very first portion of the discussion the presentation that I gave at the Simple Beauty Conference, because just really even understanding that beauty and glory are so intertwined is really essential to understand what's going forward. And then in the second one, I gave a really long analogy of horse training, this process of horse training, where there's a portion of time when you're working with their natural instinctive language. And then as you continue to train them for the harder and harder tasks, you actually are really going against their nature. And that is a real challenge, but that has definitely been my experience, that's part of the creative process as well. That some things seem to come instinctively and others are very against my nature. And so when we're learning to create, part of that is learning how to yield to something bigger than us, to be able to figure out how we can create effectively. And then I had a lot of questions about practicality. So I dove in basically in kind of from the perspective of archaeology, not archaeology, excuse me, architecture. From the perspective of architecture, I talked a lot about this balance between practicality, like we have to use a home or a space, and beauty, and which one of those should take precedence. And I believe very firmly that beauty needs to take precedence. So when we do run up into these questions where practicality and beauty seem to conflict with each other, just remember that architecture is just a symbol of any other application that we could use for that. So today I really want to actually define creativity. And the next time we'll get into the nuts and bolts of probably what most of you are most interested in, like how can I be more effective as a creator myself? How can I nurture creativity in my kids? We'll talk about that more than nuts and bolts next time. But in this time, it's really, really essential that we're speaking the same language. In English, we just have a really limited supply of words for things like beauty and glory and creativity. And sometimes we use words interchangeably in English for way different opposite concepts. Like sometimes we use beauty for like, oh, she's pretty and I like to look at her, versus this reminds me of the glory of God. So this difference in words and how they're used is really, really essential to understand. So I want to take today to get super, super clear on what creativity means to me when I use that word, because it is not used that way in America, in art establishments, anywhere. So first, I want to let you know what I learned in school, and I've repeated this a lot too. Like, what have I learned in school that I have had to unlearn? It's almost like most of what I am teaching you is all of the principles that I learned in school and that I had to unlearn and relearn the truth about them. And this is probably the biggest, most heart-wrenching one for me personally. This one really threw me for a loop. It robbed me of all of my love of art for several years, what I was taught about creativity. So this is a really, really big one from my personal experience, but I hope that if we can get really clear about it, it will help you to be more discerning when other people on YouTube or people are discussing art and creativity. If you're ever in a circle that people are discussing that, I hope that you can remember the nuances that people are really using when they are using the word creativity. So what I learned in school was this. So this was the perspective in the art institution that I learned in the university that I went to. They really prize and value newness. They really prize and value originality. They believe that something that has never been done before, something that will fundamentally change the world, the way the world sees things. So a lot of times they'll pull out, for example, Impressionism. So Monet had some very impressionistic paintings, and today that seems normal to us. But if you know anything about art history, which probably most of you do, That was not normal when it first came out. And in fact, it like caused riots, and they were kicked out of the salons that had really rigid rules for what art had to look like. And they had a hard time making a living. You know, they're kind of our first like poster child for the starving, suffering artist. Prior to that, there wasn't a poster child for the starving, suffering artist, because people produced things that are closer to my definition of creativity. Now, I'm not saying that Impressionism wasn't creative, and I'm not saying that it wasn't beautiful. I think in many ways, the Impressionists were still on that fence line, that fence post, where they were starting to value newness and originality and changing the world, but they still also valued beauty. It wasn't like an either or. But now in our modern times today, it is an either or. In fact, if you do anything beautiful, that's already been done before and it's no longer original. So they're on this side of the fence. The only thing that is valued is newness and originality, changing the world, changing the way the world sees things. They really love like this kind of attitude of rebellion. Like if you can rebel against the institutions or against tradition, and if you can do something that really rocks the world, then you're more praised. That is what they value. That is what they want. And so they'll teach that it's usually resisted at first, but it's okay, because if you're driven by your desire and your motive and your message, then a real artist won't care how it's received. So this kind of idea of the artist as this kind of self-flagellating missionary of newness, so to speak, is something that has really carried through the 20th century. And it is taught today like it is just like everybody knows that's what it is. And people will also talk about this when they're talking about creativity in any like entrepreneurial pursuit. They're looking for the new idea, the something original, the something that's going to change the world. Think of like, AI or airplanes. Like these are really new and totally never been done before sort of things. So this is what most of the world is meaning when they use the word creativity and let's improve creativity. I was recently listening to something by Jordan Peterson, and I really respect his perspective and his thoughts on a lot of things, but I found myself like, Jordan hasn't distinguished between these two types of creativity. He's still using them interchangeably. So I kind of want to tell you what he talks about too, so that I can further distinguish these two basic ideas. So he says that creativity, this kind of like newness, originality, rule breaking, out of the box thinking, totally change the world kind of attitude, that it actually comes down to a factor of personality. And he says that there are some people that, people that are high in creativity are high in what he calls openness. I don't know if you've ever taken his personality test. It's interesting. I've done it. I'll tell you a little bit more about my results in a second. But he says that people that are high in creativity are high in openness, but they're low in conscientiousness, which is like do your duty, get down the nuts and bolts, do the hard work. You have to do the hard work. That's the conscientiousness. Openness is like, I like new experiences. I like beauty. I'm in touch with my feelings. Like this is interesting, right? And these people who are high in creativity also tend to be very liberal politically. People low in creativity, which he calls low in creativity, they're really, really low in openness. So they don't like new experiences. They want things the same. They want it to feel safe. But they're really high in conscientiousness. So they do their duty and they don't ask questions and they get stuff done. And they tend to be really conservative. So I found myself kind of like scratching my head wondering, okay, well, what does Jordan Peterson have to say about people like me, who when I take that test, I actually score really high in openness and I also score really high in conscientiousness. So what about people who are sensitive to beauty and visual surroundings, but who also care very much about doing the right thing and doing our duty, right? So you can't just separate people into one or two. And I don't think that he was meaning to say that anyway, but he did kind of describe these two almost as polar opposites. And he says more of the world is low in creativity and that it's really kind of rare to be high in creativity. And I question that. I don't know if I believe in that. Another thing that is taught all the time, and we hear it all the time, Michelangelo was a genius. Leonardo da Vinci, he was a genius. Think like Leonardo da Vinci, you'll be a genius. And this was another thing even that Jordan Peterson said. Anybody who's good or high in creativity is also high in intelligence. They have to be smart. You have to be a genius. You have to be really good. So these are the things that I learned. And guess what the conclusion was in my lecture series on creativity? That was a required prerequisite at my university for all fine art degrees. The professor stood up there and said, children are not creative. She said that. Is there any part of your soul that is like, what? Because that's what my soul said. What? But think about it. I mean, let's come back. Little children don't create anything that has never been done before. They're stylistically, that style, the children's like create, that style's been done before. They don't change the world in the sense that they've invented something totally new and miraculous, right? When you're defining creativity within these bounds of newness and originality, something that's never been done before, something that like totally rocks the world going forward, something that maybe is resisted at first, the artist doesn't care how it's perceived. He just pure dedication to his goals. Like, I don't know about you, but my children don't draw because they're dedicated to the goal of drawing. They draw because they enjoy drawing. Okay, so I can understand why if this is your perspective, yeah, you're going to come to this conclusion that children are not creative. But I just, and then I'll continue and then I'll ask you the question. So Jordan Peterson also, like, he struggled with this because he brings up over and over in several of his videos on creativity that these poor starving artists, right? And we hear this all the time, starving artists, you can't ever make it in life if you're an artist. And he even tells this guy is interviewing him, he says, do businesses look for creative people? And he's like, oh, no, businesses don't look for creative people. It's a real conundrum. Systems don't nurture creativity. At the bottom, they want people who will do as they're told. The creative people are weeded out right away. The problem, though, is the obedient people rise up the ladder. They have no creativity when they reach the top, and the leaders are all desperate for it. They know they need it. We talked a little about that in the first creativity class about some of this practicality and all of the business books that I was reading over and over and over that are just begging for people that have developed some kind of creativity in their bones because it is so lacking in the marketplace today. But Jordan Peterson is like, oh, well, it's lacking because they don't reward it. They don't want it. They want obedient employees. They want kind of the factory systematized system. But I don't think that's totally true when we look at creativity in a different way, especially for people that are high in openness and also high in conscientiousness. So let me just do a little bit more on the economic value, and then I'm going to ask you guys some questions. So Jordan complained multiple times. He's like, like, why doesn't our culture, why aren't we paying for more great artists in our modern times? Like, why is it left up to public museums to try and pay for these artists, because public museums can't pay for them all? We can't keep supporting all these artists that are wanting to create, and why don't we value it? Why don't we value it? And he says, like, the guy that was interviewing him, how do we know the imposters from the real deals who are going to really create something that lasts? And Jordan argued, he's like, look, if you go to, he said the amount of money that comes into France and Italy from travel, just so people can see the beautiful buildings that have been built, is astronomical. And he's like, I don't understand why people don't economically support things that are beautiful, because there is an economic payoff in the long run. People will come many miles to see beautiful artwork. They will. But then, and so he makes this conclusion that we should value it economically because it drives tourism. So he's trying to make an economic argument here. But when you listen to him long enough, this is his real conclusion. He says we really should value it because it gives us experience with the divine. And he'll say that over and over and over. It gives us experience with divine. And and I think the reason why he struggles and can't see the economic, or can't describe in better terms why we should create an economic case for valuing art, is because he still has these ideas are different. He'll even compare a rock singer who's singing about really awful things to somebody who has an experience with the divine with a beautiful piece of art. Like, he's even talked about them like they're the same. And I think that just maybe it comes from his atheism in the past, or maybe, I don't know, like, he hasn't differentiated between inspiration that leads to good fruit and inspiration that leads to evil fruit. Like there has to be a differentiation there. So not everything that's original and new is therefore good, right? And we haven't made that distinction in schools. And I think even Jordan Peterson is still wrestling with that idea. So in conclusion of this presentation that he was giving, this interview that he was having, he shared this story about the zebra. So the zebra is, he said that when scientists were trying to study zebras on the African plain, they couldn't keep track of them. Like they'd be watching one and they'd watch the behavior and they couldn't keep track of that one. And they'd look down at their notebook to take a note and they'd look right up and then they can't remember like which zebra was I just following, because they all just kind of blend in together and look the same. And Jordan Peterson made the point. He said, look, a zebra is not, he doesn't have those stripes because he's camouflaged with the environment. He really sticks out when he's standing in grass. Black and white does not look like grass. Lions look like grass. So the point of the stripes is not to be camouflaged. The point of the stripes is to be really confusing to the predators, because a lion can't hunt a herd of zebras. He can only hunt one zebra at a time. And so when they all blend in together and there's this confusion with all of these stripes, with all of these zebras, the lion has a much, much harder time picking out just one. And the reason they get the young ones and the old ones is not just because they're easier to catch, but because they're actually easier to see and to stalk and to find amidst the group. They're actually distinguishable. So these scientists were having this trouble, like, how do I distinguish this one guy that I'm trying to like follow, this one zebra's behavior to study them? And they started putting tags on them, like a red tag on the ear or something on the tail or a little blotch of paint on the hindquarter or something. And their scientific study had to end really fast, because guess what happened once they marked a zebra? The lions got him. The lions got him. So he concludes with this like really sad story of this zebra saying the reason we don't have creative people is because as soon as you mark yourself, you become a target. And I'm like, hold on here. I'm not comfortable with this idea of creativity. Like is there some truth to it? Yes, but there's so much more to creativity. So I want to ask you, before I tell you what my definition is and before I tell you what my thoughts are, I want to ask you, what about this information sits right and feels true? What about this information that I've told you, what I've learned about creativity going through art school? What doesn't sit right with you? How do you define it? No wrong answers here.
I like to define creativity as creating something. So not necessarily that it has to be new or original or that it has to follow any certain rules, but creating something.
Okay. So it doesn't have to follow rules. You are just going through the act of creating something, anything. Right? Okay, like what? What can you create? Does it have to be art? Can it be something else?
No, music, writing, anything. I keep it pretty open-ended for my kids and what I use is their creating things.
What about a clean laundry room? Is that creating? We'll talk more about that next time. Yeah, right. I mean, any of the things that we consider creative arts are easy. Art, writing, poetry, music, dancing, playwrights. Amanda, you have your hand up.
So a clean room was the first thing that came to my mind, actually, because anything that wasn't there before, right? Creating order from what used to be chaos is my definition of creativity. So a room is an easy way to see that, but you could take, a palette of paint and create order so that it looks like something when before it didn't look like something, but just creating order of what used to be chaos, putting into existence something that did not exist before is creating. And to me,
I love that. Yes, especially if what you're putting into existence is, like you said, more orderly than it was before. You can put new things into existence that didn't create before, that weren't created before, that didn't exist before. But if they're disorderly and awful, then it might not be a great thing to do, right? So I'm really, really glad that you pointed that out because that's actually what we're going to talk about for the whole last class, or at least a good portion of the last class is this idea of order and chaos, because I have too much to say about that to go into it right now. But yes, anytime you put something out there that is meaningful and orderly, that it wasn't there before, you are creating something. Any other thoughts? Are you worried about economic opportunity for your children if they say, hey, mom, I want to be an artist when I grow up?
So I had one thought. I just wanted to clarify. Did you say he said that when the zebra was tagged, then it was attacked, and that's why we don't have creative people? Because if there is a one creative person, it's taken out?
Yes.
So along those lines, I guess I resonated with that I feel like if you say you are creative, you are attacked in some ways, or it's not logical. You won't make any money at doing that. And so in a way they are eliminating, I don't know, just from my own personal life, sometimes I've kept back or I haven't done it because it didn't seem valid or it didn't seem important enough, or which I think is the opposite when you talked about all the good that comes from being creative and creating beauty. We need that more than anything. And so it would seem to be under attack. So that was part that resonated with me.
Yeah. And I think you're right to have that resonate with you. Cause I think in every kind of partial truth, there is a real legitimate truth. You know, I think the most convincing lies are, and I don't mean to say that everything that Jordan Peterson said was a lie, but I think the most convincing half-truths are convincing because they are true. It's 98% true and then 2% lie. Like there's something that we're missing. And I think that's the part that doesn't fit well with me. Yes, it does happen but people can stick out their necks and take a risk and they can't be chopped off. And I think it's interesting too, that like we have the story of the crab, you know, like if one crab is trying to crawl out of the boiling water, his friends pull him down. But that's different than the case of the zebra, isn't it? Because it's not the other zebras that are like, oh, you're tagged, you're out of the herd. It's just the lion, right? The lion is looking for him. So it's a different kind of idea. It's not just that your friends are pulling you down. It's that the actual predators that don't want creative things to happen are going to target you. So there's kind of a different kind of thing there. And there are risks involved in creativity for sure. For sure there are. And I think it's natural and normal for all of us as moms to be like, wait, you want to be a pianist when you grow up? Are you sure that's what you want to do to provide for your family? Right? I think it's natural and normal. And we talked about practicality and the principle of architecture last time, that beauty does still need to take precedence over practicality if we long-term want to have enriching, beautiful, joyful lives, for sure. But it is hard because we do have to overcome this this idea that there isn't economic opportunity for creative people. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that soon. Are you motivated? Are you motivated to, I'm imagining everybody in this room is motivated to nurture creativity in their children. You wouldn't be a homeschooler if you didn't, you wouldn't be following Well-Educated Heart if you didn't. So, but I think you are probably the exception to the rule. I wanted to share, this was a major life-changing video for me. And maybe it was just the right timing. Maybe I just needed it. But this woman, Elizabeth Gilbert, shared a TED Talk called Your Elusive Creative Genius. I would highly recommend looking it up. She's engaging, she's funny, she tells great stories. She's just wonderful. But her basic premise of this whole thing was that we have come to the conclusion, she says, I had a really successful book and immediately everybody started treating me like I was doomed. And the audience kind of laughed at that. And she's like, no, but really, everybody thought I would be doomed because in reality, this was probably the most successful thing I'll ever do in my life. And I'm only 40. And what am I going to do the rest of my life? Nothing I ever do again is probably going to achieve the heights of success that this book reached. So she starts off with this kind of like creative question. She's got to come up with something new, something original, something that's going to like change the world in a really powerful way. And she accidentally did that once. She didn't expect that anything huge would happen out of it. And now she feels a sense of pressure that had never been felt before. And she makes a really important point. She says, nobody asks her father, you have engineering block, John? Because engineers aren't expected to think creatively. But creative fields like writing and art and music are expected to be creative, and this expectation creates a pressure that doesn't exist in other fields. And she said artists have been killing themselves off for hundreds of years because of this pressure. And she started to look for, just to keep herself sane, she started to look for some ways to think about creativity that didn't create so much pressure. And I can tell you, like, this is why my creative spirit died in art school, because I did not do well under that pressure. I just didn't. I didn't feel like I was capable of coming up with new things. I didn't think the way they told me that I needed to think. I didn't think the way the other students thought. Like, I didn't fit this definition of creativity, partly because I was very high in conscientiousness and most of my other friends in my degree program were not. So I just felt really, really different. And I really resonated with what she said here. And she described that all the time in about the 19th century, right around the Impressionist era, maybe a little bit before, maybe as early as Michelangelo, but I don't know if during his lifetime he was ever called a genius. But she said we started calling the artist a genius, and that's not the way it has been historically. She said in the Roman religion, I looked this up on the internet to confirm what she was saying, the real original definition of genius was basically like an attendant spirit that lived in your studio with you, in your home with you, and helped you to create. That was what a genius was. It was outside of the artist. It was separate from the artist, and it was there to help you. So that's really different than me being the genius, right? Fundamentally different, and completely removes the pressure. And that's what she was talking about by the end of her TED Talk, was just how much saner we would all be. None of us would be subject to narcissism because we all knew it was our genius that made it great. It wasn't us. And we wouldn't be subject to like mass depression and suicide that happens in most creative fields, because everybody just knows that your genius is kind of lame and you didn't get a lot of help with that project. So there was that distance, that disconnect between the creative power and the artist themselves that created a lot of safety and sanity for the artist. So here is a Roman vase, just to demonstrate what I'm talking about. On the right is the winged Roman genius facing a woman who has a tambourine and a mirror. So they saw it as very separate from the person. And then I also realized that originality doesn't need to be combined with creativity. They are two different words for a reason. And this quote by C.S. Lewis from Mere Christianity just made my life. I memorized it because it's so helpful to me, even in literature and art. No man who bothers about originality will ever be original. Whereas if you simply try to tell the truth without caring twopence how often it has been told before, you will 9 times out of 10 become original without ever having noticed it. So this concept that is taught over and over and over, that being original is the same thing as being creative, it's just not true. They're two very different things. And originality, according to C.S. Lewis, is way easier to achieve if you don't even bother trying. Just don't even try to be original. Just try to tell the truth. Just try to tell the truth, which is way more in line with what you were all saying about your creative pursuits. Anything creative is going to be something that is you're coming up with something new, or that didn't exist before, but maybe it has existed in a different form. Maybe it's slightly different. Maybe you're creating more order. Maybe you're using the quote creative arts, the fields of the creative arts. Maybe you're just cleaning a room. Maybe you're doing something different. Maybe you're just cooking a meal. So this is my definition of creativity that I have landed on over years of thinking about this and trying to even find time for myself to create, to justify the time that I spend creating. My definition is that true creativity will meet all of these criteria. Number one, you really try to work with that divine spirit of genius. You know it's not you, you know it's outside of you, and you really put forth an effort to listen to what he or she is telling you. The goal is not newness or originality. The goal is to produce meaning and order from chaos. Like I said, we'll talk more about that next time. And then lastly, the product of true creativity, I think, ultimately points generations of people in both directions to the healing power of the divine. I think that's true of all the cathedrals, the ones that they spent 300 years building or 1,000 years building. The whole lifetime from, you know, one guy was spent on just a portion of this cathedral that he never saw completed. But he hits that third one right on the head, right? Ultimately pointing generations of people to the healing power of divine. So much of our classical traditional pre-1900s art is clearly working toward this goal. I do not believe that creativity is originality. It might become so, like C.S. Lewis said, you might become original, but that's not the same thing as creativity. And it's not the goal of creativity. It's, I don't think, like Jordan says, I do not believe that it is limited to a single personality trait. I really don't. And even though some forms of creativity may come more naturally to some people with those traits, I really believe that everybody is capable of creating and being creative. So, and I also don't think that creativity actually is very often noticed or recognized for changing the world, even after you die. Like some people will say, well, the artist just has to die and then they'll be recognized for their creative genius. No, I think the vast majority of true creative effort really does go unnoticed, but it still changes the world. Even though, like, I love that story that Marlene shared at the World Conference for Women, I believe it was, when she talked about when that guy got up and he talked about, he was like the mayor and he talked about all of his achievements that he'd accomplished on his own. And then the woman got up afterward and shared the story of all the little girls in her class. Do you guys remember this story? Those are the things that like never get noticed. The women, the little girl that said, I just want to be a good mom. And she was the mom of that mayor. We're not going to be recognized for changing the world, but gosh darn it, we are going to change the world. It's still, creativity surely does have the power to change the world, but you likely may well never be recognized for it. And that's okay, because that's not why we do it. So back in the Renaissance, I keep coming back to this economic question because I think it's a real thing for all parents. Back in the Renaissance, all the artists that were supported were pretty much supported by the Medici family. I don't know how much you know about their story. I'm not going to go into the whole thing right now, but I will say, oh gosh, we only have like 20 minutes left, so I would have to make this really quick. The Medici family supported Michelangelo. They supported Leonardo da Vinci. It was a generational one. The original guy was like a banker and he got really rich, but he kept, for all appearances, he remained really poor. So he amassed this enormous fortune, which he passed on to his children and told them to maintain a very modest living. And some of them did and some of them didn't. And, you know, we have the whole story of the Medici family getting really powerful and really wealthy and getting very intertwined with the Catholic Church. Some of their descendants became the Pope, so they were very powerful. They had armies at their disposal. But in this process of like their growth from the Medici family, growing from very humble beginnings to very powerful beginnings, they knew the power of beauty from the very get-go. And this original guy would support artists. And Michelangelo was supported by, was actually basically an adopted son of either his son or his grandson, and was raised with two of the brothers that ultimately became very wicked. And he, in doing the David, for example, the David was actually, and this is a really cool story to tell the whole thing, I'm just running really fast through it right now. But in doing the David, he was actually breaking ties with these boys that he had been raised with because they represented Goliath and Florence represented the David when he carved that stone. So he was trying really hard to extract beauty and art from this powerful political agenda. And he was trying very desperately to pull it apart and keep freedom for individuals and expression alive. So he really had like a political agenda with the David. It's a really cool story. But the Medici really was responsible for most of the Renaissance. They financed most of the Renaissance. They valued beauty, they paid for beauty, they supported artists, that's how people made a living. And Michelangelo died pretty bitter because their power and their money really controlled what he could create. And they even ultimately made him stop being a sculptor and forced him into doing frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which he didn't want to do. So money did have a lot of sway and a lot of power. But today, I think it's different. We don't have all of the money centralized in one institution. Yes, there are some very, very wealthy individuals, but there are still churches today that are less wealthy than the Medici were, less powerful than the Medici were. The Catholics certainly don't have the same kind of weight globally that they used to, but they still support beautiful artwork. I'll show you some in a minute. And there are some institutions that still do it. There's some schools that are, my own alma mater is starting, you can see just a little bit in some of their new buildings, they're starting to recapture some of these beauty principles. So, but what you do in your own home and your own children, and what we do on Bellam and Mothers of Influence, all these little ways, these are ways that we support it today, and it's just as powerful. So let me show you some examples. So the Sangria de Familia, I forgot to put the day in there, Familia. This building was started in 1882. Have you guys ever heard the word gaudy? Like, ooh, that is so gaudy. We kind of use that negatively. It's the second architect of this building, Sangria de Familia, was Gaudi. That was his name. And we get the term Gaudi from him because you'll see it's pretty gaudy. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of decoration there. It's very visually busy. Okay. So, but this is actually, the brown is the unfinished portion and the white is the finished portion. So this building has been going on since 1882 and it is still in the process of being built. And they're really trying to stay true to these original older designers that had this vision. And it's really amazing. This is where you can see, it's very gaudy, but they're still preserving the beauty here. And even though he has maybe more flourishes and embellishments than maybe feels restful to some people's eye, which is where we get the term, man, that's so gaudy, you can still tell that he was trying, his effort was to draw closer to God. And he has a very unique style that really nobody else has copied. This is the interior. He wanted the columns to appear like trees, and don't they? And that is so symbolically rich, which I won't get into right now. But the fact that this, all cathedrals are set in the shape of a cross, but he turned the pillars into trees, and they're just beautiful. Like, it's so beautiful. You can see they're just under constant construction. You can see all the netting in there, but they're still working on it hundreds of years later. This is the ceiling. Isn't that beautiful? So beautiful. I would love to see this in person. Last time we talked about the Guggenheim Museum. Totally different, eh? Totally different aim with that architecture. Completely different aim. Who is trying to glorify God? Who's trying to glorify himself and their own designs, their own ideas? Who's trying to be original and unique? And who's trying to glorify God? It's just stark. I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so we have temples, which not everybody could go in. But I know a lot of friends who have done artwork for the temples, and I've heard different stories. And I won't get into all of those. But I was part of a really interesting discussion when they had a big panel of people that work for the church. And they were noticing something that was kind of a growing concern for them, which I found kind of interesting and almost comical that it was a concern. But I can see the concern. The concern was they wanted the focus to be on the ordinances of the temple. But all of their new temples, they have been commissioning original works of art, and the artist is basically told that you can't have a piece of work in the temple unless you're willing to give the copyrights as well, because it can't be seen outside of the temple. So there's a lot of artwork now that you cannot see in printed magazines of the church. You can't see in church buildings that are open to the public. You just can't see them anywhere. The only places that you can see these images, these unique and special images, sacred images, are in the temple. And so any artist that produces for that has to promise not to share it on social media. They might share like one image that will die fast, but it can't permanently live online. It is only to be seen in the temple. And something that they started noticing that was really interesting is that as they were purchasing all of these original artworks for various temples, is that there were a number of people who were traveling from temple to temple to temple to temple to temple to see the artwork, which to me is really fascinating. People travel, just like Jordan Peterson pointed out, people travel to see beautiful things. And the worry was that it would take the focus off of the ordinances, which, or you know, the things that we do in the temple. But in my mind, they're so similar. Of course, an ordinance is an ordinance and it can only be an ordinance. But that internal drive to connect with God through beautiful artwork is eternal. It is historical. It goes in every direction, forward and backwards. People are drawn to beautiful things. So I'm not surprised at all that they're having people that are traveling between temple to temple just to see the artwork and also doing some ordinances while they're there. I can see why that's becoming a thing. But it does speak to it speaks volumes to the fact that I love that there are churches. The Catholic Church is the one that is paying for this still hundreds of years later. They're still paying for excellent craftsmanship and artistry and continuing visionary design. They're still footing the bill for that. There are churches that are doing that, and our church is doing, my personal church is doing more and more of it. And I can even see in the church-owned university. This is the original building. I laughed really hard when I heard Jordan Peterson talk about the architecture. I was wishing I had found his, I wish I'd remembered him talking about the architecture. I would have included it in last meeting, but he said the architecture on campus on campuses all over the world. He talked about the University of Toronto, which is where he was at the time. But he said the architecture is absolutely reflective of the values of the campus. When the campuses were originally built in the 1800s or whenever most of these old colleges were established, they were built for higher education and learning. It was not to produce employees or people to go out in the marketplace. They were built for the glory of God. Most of them began as Christian institutions, and they were built to draw students closer to God and to learn from God. That's what they were built for. And this is the Carl G. Mazer building. This is what it was built for. And the architecture supports the mission. As colleges have become more and more and more about turning out, maybe the term is overused, factory workers, but I feel like it's really fitting. That's exactly what the buildings look like. This was the very hall that I would walk down and the very classrooms that I would sit in to take art classes. Is it just me? Or would you rather study art here than here? Is it just me? But it became factory. Now I say that, but I start to smile because things are starting to ever so slowly. I want to give a ray of hope here. Ever so slowly, things are starting to turn around. This was the old alumni building on the top. This is the new one. Do you notice a difference here? Do you notice a difference? This is the old dorms where the students slept and ate. And these are the new dorms. Do you notice a difference? I notice a difference. They're starting to realize that you can't thrive in these things. So there are institutions that are starting to recognize that. But I really think the biggest power, the very, very, very biggest power for all of us is going to be us as individuals. I really believe that. Back in the Renaissance, when the Medici had all the bucks, fine. It could be in the hands of the upper ups. Let it be in the hands of the big institutions, the churches, the politicians, the political art museums. We've lost the funds of political art museums. They do not spend a dime on beautiful artwork. We can't rely on them. In fact, I was watching a video the other day by a realist artist. He's a landscape artist. And they would do a plein air painting competition. What plein air means is you go out in nature and you paint in plein air. And you do it in one sitting and you paint a beautiful landscape in one sitting. So they would have these plein air competitions, and public comes from all over everywhere. They get a bigger turnout for people observing these artists doing their plein air paintings than they do for any of their open exhibitions. Any of them. They get a massive public turnout because people want to see these artists doing plein air artwork. And one of the guys that was producing the artwork, his name was Scott Burdick. He said, you know, he was there, and one of the museum curators came up to him and said, hey, we are so grateful that you're doing this. We're so grateful because you guys make it possible for us to raise the funds for us to buy really important artwork. Could you imagine Scott's response to that? So what I do is not important, clearly? No, because it's not new and it's not original. It's people have been painting landscapes for ages, right? So it's not groundbreaking. It's not going to change the world. But it's so clear because the public loves it and they come and they pay for these artworks and it raises money. So I asked my friend Casey Childs, who is a good friend of a guy named Lip King. I'll show you their artwork in just a second. Basically, I just wanted to know, he told me when I was there, we painted live models together for a while in his studio. And he still does it, but I have moved away. So I'm super sad that I can't do that anymore. But anyway, when we were having one of our conversations, he talked about how Jeremy Lipking, who is a really high-priced realist artist today, said that he could buy original artworks on like eBay for super cheap. So he would buy old masterworks that were little known, like never in museums, and he would put them in his studio and he would learn from them. He would study from them visually. And that's how he learned to paint. He studied from the artworks of old dead masters. But he could afford it because they were really cheap on eBay. But then Casey was telling me how they got a lot more expensive. And so I asked him for some examples of that. And he said, he told me about Emile Friant's painting called Cast Shadows. So this is my friend Casey Childs. This is one of his paintings today. This is another one of his paintings. This is Jeremy Lipking. So these are artists, contemporary artists that never get recognized by museums at all, but they sell for incredibly high prices today. They're very well known. The galleries love them. Their collectors love them. They know how to paint beautiful works of art. This is the work by Emile Friant. It was published in, I think, 1882, 1891. It was painted in 1891. And this is the painting. So 1891, if you know from your art history, is really on the cusp of you know, the Impressionists were before this. They rocked the art world. Everything was changing. And now everybody's starting to worship newness over beauty. So some of these old realists that are just sticking out with their realism are just considered kind of like poo-poo. So nobody really valued this. So Emile Friant kind of fell out of favor for a long time. He wasn't really very well known. He didn't command huge prices. And so this painting right here, this painting sold for, guess what? $25,000 on eBay, which maybe you think is a lot of money because I certainly have never spent $75,000 or $25,000 on eBay. But a few years later, it sold for $508,000 at Sotheby's, which is an art auction place. And then it was donated to the d'Orsay Museum. So you can see here from this, what I want you to take from this is that realism and beauty was not valued for a long time. But guess what? It is being valued more and more and more. More people are coming to the plein air events. More people are paying higher dollars for realism and realistic paintings. It not just for Emile Friant because he was back in the 1890s. They're also paying a lot more money for Jeremy Lipking and for Casey Childs. They paint beautiful things now and they command really high prices. So those are still predominantly in the hands of like successful businessmen. I think wealth is more distributed now than it ever has been in the history of the world. And so individuals can buy these expensive paintings for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the real power that I see is you women, because maybe you can't buy $100,000 painting from somebody who's trying to preserve principles of beauty in the art world today. Maybe that's not in your budget, but you are nurturing. You're nurturing the principles in the hearts of your kids. And that is so powerful. Another thing that's really powerful example, The Chosen. It was crowdfunded. Little donations from people like you and me that can only afford $10, $15, $100 here and there. This was a crowdfunded show and it's beautiful. It never, ever, ever would have flown in Hollywood. Do you agree? It never would have. But there are enough individuals that have enough expendable income they can support in their small means that they raised $100 million to create this production. That's huge. That is huge. We are turning the tide of the art world economically, as well as the heart-based. If this never got funded, he would have done his best to produce it anyway. And the costumes would have been cheaper and maybe the backdrops wouldn't have been as cool, but it would have still been awesome. But this is a testament to the fact that the thirst and the love of truth and goodness and beauty it was dead for the early 1900s, but it is growing and it is coming back so strong. I have so much hope. We are not alone in our Bellum community. We're not alone. People will support beauty and things that are created that are beautiful. And it's not because they've never been done before, although a show like The Chosen hasn't been. It happened to be original, but its first goal was to tell the truth. And then it became original without ever having noticed it, right? I think Bellum Center for Artful Living is another one of those things. It is there that we are all supporting with our little dollars every month towards the Bellum at Home. We're supporting building this campus that is going to preserve and teach the fundamental principles of beauty. This is what we're doing individually. I think it's just so amazing and so powerful. So I don't know where my header went on this, but I really want to get clear with you women before we head into our final one next time. And I don't know if it will be the final one. And Marley, I'm actually going to have to change the date because I'm going to be out of town on the 16th. So we might need to do it the first Monday of December. Hopefully that will work for people instead of the second Monday. Mostly I've been on the second Monday, so we will have to change that. But I want to hear from you. This header was supposed to say what's next. What should I talk about next time? Because I know that we all face challenges when we're creating. Oh, there's my header. I had to accidentally click it. How funny. So what challenges do you face? Amanda, you mentioned feeling like there were, I think she's logged off now. Oh, there you are.
I'm here.
Oh, it wasn't you, Amanda. It was someone else. I'm looking for, it was somebody else who was mentioning how it feels really true that she was kind of like the zebra. And when you create, it feels risky, like somebody's gonna get you.
It's Chalet. You're thinking of Chalet.
Chalet. It was Chalet. Okay. I had her. Thank you very much, Marley. So Chalet looks like she's hopped off, so I can't ask her to tell me more, but I really want to hear from you. And if we don't have time, we're running out of time. We only have a couple minutes left. Please put it in the chat because I want to talk more later. Amanda, are you wanting to say something? I saw you tap the screen. No. Okay. All right. Let me look at the chat in case I've missed something there.
I haven't seen questions come through the chat, Natalie. I've posted some resources, but not questions. And I think, I hope your mind is going over these things because we have a minute or two, but I'll also post these over in the comments and maybe we can keep that discussion going as you have time, those of you who are here, and if you watch this recording, to kind of let this settle on you.
I want to address really what challenges you have, because I've had so many challenges in creating, but I'm sure they're different than your challenges. And something that I may have learned may be helpful to you. I really want to make sure that I am honed in on what you struggle with. I had a really sweet gal reach out to me love her, dear friend. She's in the middle of the move now, so she's not here on the call with us. But she asked some questions that I didn't even think to address that were raised by my last one. And and we'll go over those questions next time. I'll make sure I have her permission before I say her name. But she had really good questions. Like, I enjoy creating when I don't have any pressure on me and I'm not even thinking about like what I want or what anybody else, if I don't think anybody's going to see it, I really enjoy it. But if anybody's going to look at it, like it's really terrifying. And how do you overcome that? And what's the point of creating if you're not ever going to plan on sharing it? Like those were really good questions. And we had a great conversation about it and actually helped me get out of my own personal slump as in like telling her what she should do. I'm like, oh yeah, I should do that too today. I'm really struggling with my painting. So going over these principles are just as applicable to me as they are to you. So if you have any questions, it's helpful. Amanda, I see your hand raised.
I really appreciate that you pointed out like the practical versus just the beauty maybe was the vocabulary you used. That sometimes we do something that feels impractical. And I feel that way about my home. I already mentioned that like I look at my home and I'm like, hey, I'm trying to create order where there was chaos. I want beauty for beauty's sake so that I feel beautiful in my home, right? So I feel beauty in my home. And for a decade, I didn't really focus on beauty. I focused on practicality of setting up a practical space with practical systems. And those have their place, but I mean, this is the first one I've tuned into. So this is just getting my brain moving. So I need to go listen to the other two. But it's
The
like
second one especially, right, girls?
whetting my appetite of like, I mean, I've been chewing on the idea that I've focused on practical spaces and I'm still hungry for more beauty in the place that I call my home. And it's my sanctuary. So a challenge I face when creating is specifically in a home setting, not necessarily in the artistic discipline, but just a home, a space, is almost battling that thought that it has to be practical above beauty. And I don't know if it's hardwired, if it's family, if it's personality, if it's culture,
it's
probably
cultural, probably all above. Yeah.
Yeah. That just like, I want to do something for beauty's sake. And when I was touring one of our temples with some friends who had never been into that space before, her 14-year-old son looked at one of the big, huge doors to a celestial room and was like, that door might have cost like $3,000. And there's this like practical side of me that wants to say like, yeah, I wonder what else that could have gone towards. But then the other side is like, it's gorgeous. I actually want my home to look like this. Why wouldn't you do that? Right. So maybe just I think my biggest challenge is that practical component battling, right? The practicality of a budget, the practicality of kids ruining nice things, the practicality of making a space feel like heaven when, just beauty versus practicality. And you touched on it, but I think that's been the biggest one for me in my physical space of my home.
It's absolutely, you're not the only one. I think you're in really, really good company. I remember my mom told me when I was a little girl, she said there was only one purchase that she ever regretted not making. She said, there's lots of things I've purchased that I've always regretted purchasing. Like, dang it, why did I spend money on that? But she says there's only one that I regretted not painting or not buying, and it was a painting, a work of art that she really loved. And she thought, oh, it's not practical to spend money on that. And she always has regretted not buying it. And I had the same experience. I was young. I was a newlywed, and my husband and I really loved living in Kansas. And we attended an art show of local Kansas artists. And there was a landscape that was just, both of us were like, we love this painting. It was just totally captured the feeling of Kansas. And we loved it. We were moving back to Utah soon. And so we really wanted to buy this to love Kansas by and remember Kansas by. Now we're back in Kansas, but at that time we didn't know we'd be coming back. So Yeah, it was $500 and we were young, newlywed people, and $500 was a lot of money. But I still am like, oh, I wish I'd bought that painting. If I knew what I knew now, I would have bought the painting. In fact, I did. I took my daughter out for a special date and we went to an art gallery and we both saw a painting that we really liked. And I looked at the price tag. I'm like, I'm gonna do it. It's gonna be another regret if I don't do it. So we bought it. And I called my husband. I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I just spent a lot of money. And instead of being like, you what? He was like, no, I'm glad you did. We should have done that first painting too. You'll never regret it. You'll never regret spending money on things that are beautiful, that really inspire you and draw you closer to God. Okay. I think we gotta end, Marley. We're probably a little bit over time.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just welcoming my teenager who just popped in for just a second. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Welcome to Marley's teenager.
Natalie, thank you for today. And I'm looking forward to a discussion on these questions over here. I think if we can let those sit and kind of come up with those things, that will be a beautiful lead into what we do next. So thank you. And I'm especially excited because one of the things I'm passionate about is that we do create. As women, we are creating things all the time. They just aren't always tangible. And so we don't recognize them as being creation. But a warm, loving feeling when a child comes home from school is an act of creation. And we just don't have language or ways of acknowledging what we as women do all the time.
Yeah, that's why I want to define creativity so carefully, because it is not just limited to the creative arts. It's everywhere and in everything that we do, especially as women and men too, in their workplaces. There is so much room for creativity in whatever job they're in. People think that math is not a creative field, but it's an extremely creative field. The sciences are a creative field. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to abandon all rules, because science and math have rules, and people just think that like creativity, you can't have rules, but you do. You create the best when you have structure and order in place to force you to solve a problem. Creativity is about solving a problem, and we as moms do that all the time. That warm feeling when our kids come in, absolutely. And those are the hardest things to create. I think I can do paintings better than that one, at least, but I hope I'm getting better, right? We're all working on that. So thanks, Marley.
Thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to the discussion continuing. So we'll pick Natalie up again. Natalie, you stay on and we'll figure out when the next time will be.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.